Okay, so this is actually going to be a rather short video, but don't let that fool you or distract you because it's actually a very important topic. The idea that the reason we use a sample is so that we can take the information that we find about a sample and use it to infer or make a decision about then the population. The whole idea of using a sample is to say, my population is this, I took this subset, I found out about them, and because I found out about this subset, I also know something about my population. So it's very important that before we get our sample then, that we make sure that we have a good random sample so that there is no bias built into this sample information, or we don't really have the ability to make this inference about the population. So we rely on random sampling in order to avoid bias in the sampling process. But even at that, just think about it. If we were to take a different sample on a different day, or even on the same day, a different sample, there's going to be some difference in what one sample says as compared to another because it's different people. So these differences between what the sample says and what the entire population says is called the margin of error. Now, be careful, because a margin of error doesn't mean there's been a mistake. It's not that kind of error. It's just this difference between what would the whole population respond and what does a sample respond. But if we look at many samples over time or at the same time, we begin to get a feel that these samples do give us a very close idea of what the population would say. Larger samples give us better data, which makes sense because a larger sample is closer to the population. So generally, if you read about a survey, if they've had a large sample size, if it was the population of the United States, like some of these presidential polls we hear about right now, we would hope that their sample size would be very large, in the tens of thousands, definitely. Okay, so moving on then. So things can obviously go wrong when you use a sample. And remember again that a survey is not just asking questions over the phone or something, but it's gathering data. We're surveying the situation, we're getting data. So good sampling techniques help to reduce error. They help to hopefully negate error to some degree, but things still happen. Undercoverage is when there's some group that doesn't get into the sample. So, or they can't be chosen for some reason. So, for example, if they're trying to get, they're using their people, their group of people that they're surveying, they want homeowners, and they call people at their home phone. Well, maybe there are homeowners that don't have a home phone. So therefore, they miss out on this group. So there would be undercoverage. Non-response is when you have your sample chosen and you attempt to get a response from your sample person, but for whatever reason you can't contact them, they refuse to participate, and so on. Non-response should not be confused with voluntary response. Non-response is you have been chosen to be in my sample, and yet you refuse to be in my sample. Voluntary response, on the other hand, they're not choosing a sample. The sample is choosing them. So there is a definite difference there. There's also response bias, which means people lie. Basically, people are called and asked questions or given a survey and asked questions, and they lie. people lie about all kinds of stuff. They lie about their age, they lie about their weight, they lie about maybe where they live, or they lie about their education, they lie about their drug use, they lie about their health. They just lie. So on these surveys, and maybe you can even say, oh yeah, I filled out a survey and I wasn't always honest either. So, there's that happens. And then, very importantly, the wording of a question is a very easy way to influence your responses. There are obviously times that questions are asked in such a way because they are trying to influence the response. They want people to answer a certain way so that then they can report back, well, the vast majority of people want to do this or that. So sometimes that wording bias is put in on purpose because people use statistics to back up what they think, and so they will play it to make that happen. At other times, it's that the question was asked in a confusing way, so perhaps not intended to be. The person asking the question knew what they meant, but the person hearing the question is like, well, do they mean this or do they mean that? So I'm not sure how to answer. So these are all ways that surveying can go wrong because of within the sample, because of the people sampled, because of the way the question was asked. All kinds of things can happen. So altogether in this section, we've identified what population is and sample, remembering that population is all of the items, things, people that we're trying to learn about. The sample is the subset of that we're actually getting response from. We've learned how to identify a voluntary response or a convenience sample, which would be poor sampling methods that do usually put bias into the response. We've learned how to describe and get a random sample. How would we do that? Using either drawing names out of a hat. This is a simple random sample. Drawing names out of a hat, using the random number generator on the calculator, or using a table of random digits. We've learned to tell a simple random sample from the stratified random sample, where we layer the individuals by commonalities and then choose some from each layer, or a cluster sample where people or individuals are grouped by usually some geographic method, and then whole clusters are chosen and data is collected from every individual in the cluster. They do have advantages and disadvantages depending on what data is being collected and where you're at and how large the population is and so on. And then we've learned that things can go on. There can be undercoverage, some sector of the population gets left out, non-response, people refusing to respond to your questioning. The wording of the question can be misleading, and other aspects of sample surveys can lead to bias. Okay, so that's the end of this section. You have a few more problems to do. I will post that on Canvas along with this video, and I hope you have a great day.